Hey everyone, welcome to our newest episode of Atlanta Divorce Law Group's Let's Be Clear. And today we're going to talk all about credit card debt and how that's going to get divided in the courts as you're going through the divorce process. And I am thrilled to be joined by our managing partner, Shawna Woods. Shawna, welcome.
Thank you. It's really good to be here.
And Shawna, you and I have so much to talk about this. This is a big issue with our clients here at Atlanta Divorce Law Group. It's one of the more pressing questions because we all have credit card debt. We all carry a bit of credit card debt, and creating a credit score, part of the deal is to have some credit card debt, and however you pay that off. But it does become a hot button issue when a household gets split up, and there are a lot of preconceived notions about how that gets done. Now, we all know that the default rule is, the basic presumption is that everything in the marital assets and debt gets split 50-50. But once we start looking at the books and go a little bit closer, and we actually find ourselves in litigation or negotiations, things can be a little bit more we have to take a little closer look than just that 50-50 presumption a lot of times. So Shawna, tell us a little bit about what you you have 19 years of experience in this. So tell us a little bit more about what really happens versus what people kind of expect to happen with their credit card debt when they're getting divorced.
Absolutely. So first we have to start and say, okay, what is marital? Right? That's the first definition that we have to determine. And sometimes people have the misconception because something's just in their name or just in their spouse's name that it's not marital. And that's simply not true.
Right.
Anything acquired during the marriage, with very, very few exceptions, is considered marital, whether it's an asset or a debt, whether it's in your name or their name. So that we have to start with the presumption of this is what is marital. Then, Georgia is what we call an equitable division state, not necessarily an equal division state. Equal, of course, means 50-50, and equitable means what's fair. Georgia courts start out saying what's fair is 50-50, and you need to give us a really good reason why, in your case, it's not fair. And there are some good reasons to get into what
and we're going to get into those reasons. So one of the first reasons is let's clear it out. I hear this from our clients all the time. I'm sure you do too. When you and I are meeting with our clients for the first time, is I did not rack up this debt. I didn't approve of this debt. The first case scenario, let's talk about being aware of the debt, but never having approved of it and feeling like this isn't something that should be on my watch because this wasn't something we had agreed upon.
And that's when we start looking at what's on those credit card statements. This isn't something we agreed upon. It's not a great reason not to have to share in the debt, because a lot of times it's things that are everyday expenses that we all use credit cards for: gas, food, grooming, things that are normal family expenses. And just because you didn't approve of it doesn't mean you don't have to share in it because it was part of the marital estate.
What about items on the credit card list that are considered more luxury goods that are not necessities? Like my now ex-wife really loves to buy expensive watches. She loves to buy expensive gifts. She buys our youngest daughter all designer clothes, and we could never afford it. I told her that, but she would go and rack up this debt. How would the courts look at those credit card statements?
It's interesting. We're going to look at the history, right? If you said, I didn't agree to this, but you've been agreeing to it for 10 years, it's still kind of looked at, well, that was part of your marriage. You continued to share in this, right? That was a tacit agreement that you're going to allow this to continue to happen. But the closer it gets to the separation date and even post-separation, those things are going to be looked at a lot more closely. Right? Are you overspending coming up to the separation date?
So I love that, because that's really, really important. A lot of times where we find our clients, they have either already communicated with each other that they are separated, or it's been sort of under the water, but nobody's mentioned it yet. But it's rare that one spouse is completely surprised, like completely where they're like, I had no clue, right? They might have thought they're working on it, but the idea of we knew that the marriage needed help, that's
Mhm.
usually not a surprise. So let's talk about that pre-divorce in, we're separated versus actually like getting there.
Absolutely. So that's the time period that you really want to look at with credit card. If credit card debt is significantly gone up, right? If it's changed in those periods of time, we find elective surgery, we find expensive trips with your friends, or even someone you've moved on with.
Yeah.
And those kind of things, you definitely want to say, that's not fair that I would share in 50% of what you're doing when it was not benefiting the family, when it was not benefiting the marriage, right? So that's why the Georgia courts allows for those arguments, because it's not fair. If I want to go to Vegas and spend $25,000 gambling, if I had a spouse, I don't think they should share in it. And so those are things that we're looking at closely.
Now, what if I am in a situation where I did not know about a credit card that my spouse had, and he had opened up a credit card without me ever knowing about it? I had never seen a statement, I'd never seen a bill, and he was out of his own separate account or some other way
Mhm.
funding those bills. And then I look at the statements and maybe they don't even relate anyway to the household income.
Mhm.
How does the court view that?
Yeah, I think it's a court by court basis, and I think it's
Mhm.
very specific, fact specific to the family. Say, for instance, you have a spouse who opened up a credit card and was spending because the other person is money controlling.
Yeah.
That's looked at differently than I've opened up a credit card and I don't want them to know that I go on golfing retreats instead of going to work. I think that's going to be looked at very different. It's very fact specific to the case. And we have to remember that, the court is not going to just grab the credit card and hand it in half, right? They're going to look at the estate as a whole. And the
Yeah.
wage earner may be paying off those credit card debts, but that might be in I guess in sharing that they get more of the asset since they are paying more of the debt. But if you're looking specifically at these credit cards debts, is that going to be considered part of the estate? I would argue, if I was representing the person who didn't know about the credit card, that they shouldn't share in, because it was not a marital decision, it was an independent decision.
Mhm.
Again, you're going to have to look at, how long did this go on? Did this other person hide their head in the sand for 10 years and was not aware of the finances? Then they didn't really pay attention to the marital estate.
And let's talk about some of what you just brought up, the financial control. And let's take it even
Mhm,
further and talk about financial abuse. Could financial
mhm.
abuse, in the form of keeping somebody completely in the dark about money coming in, money going out of the house, could that be a defense to credit card debt? If I am, let's give a stereotypical situation, a stay-home housewife that taking care of the children, and
Mhm.
the husband's the one bringing in the income, has control over all the income, has control of the state, the credit cards, everything, and never lets me see anything, never lets me be aware of anything, just gives me enough to take care of the household. Can I then claim I had no idea we were this much in the red with credit card statements? So I should not have to carry any of this burden.
Well, and a typical lawyer, I'm going to say it depends. And it depends on, was it abuse or was this kind of control something you guys agreed upon? Did you want to be involved in the finances? Were you wanting to know what was going on? Were you participating? Or did you give your control over to the other person and say, you take care of it? And in my opinion, and I think in a lot of courts' opinion, if you willingly gave your control over to someone, right, it's not
Mhm.
abuse. You said, I don't want to have to deal with that. What they've done, you've been in agreement to all along, because you gave it away. Now, if there's another situation in which it is and we see these a lot, Sarah, with abusive type of
Mm-hmm.
situation, even if it hasn't risen to the level of physical abuse, but it's a mental and emotional abuse where they're very controlling on the finances, then I think there's a whole argument to be made that the person who has been the abused person shouldn't have to share in that debt.
Let's talk about let's give some advice. Let's give some, not legal advice, just general tips on if, what could set you up in a better set you up for before you go seek a consultation with an attorney, right? I hear this very often where people don't want to speak to an attorney till they say, I want to make sure I've paid off all the credit card debt first, then I want to go to an attorney. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you don't necessarily have to start a divorce or a separation case immediately when you speak to an attorney. I think you should speak to an attorney about what the reality of your finances are so that you can strategically plan out how to be in a better place post-divorce for yourself, right? I think the first thing you need to do is pull your credit report.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that it would be wise to actually pay off all the credit cards before somebody goes and files for divorce?
Not necessarily. It may behoove you to pay it off, as we cash out the assets, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we really do need to see where you are financially. You might not be able to afford to pay off those credit card debts. The other person might be in that better position, and you've just created a dearth of asset for yourself, right? You don't know what position you're going to be in once you file for that divorce. And that's the scary time. And you don't want to change a whole lot before you file for that divorce.
Yeah, I always tell our clients before they decide to file is, before they're our clients, I'm always telling them it's best you let us first see like the true books,
Mhm.
what is truly the balance sheet here, and then let us make some strategic decisions on when would be the best time to file. And to your point, sometimes you're going in, you've just paid off $10,000 of debt out of your own pocket,
Mhm.
which could have been marital debt that could have been split up. People have a funny relationship with debt, though, and sometimes I think debt creates some sort of a mental block before they can
Mhm.
take a big step forward in life, where it's like, I will once I do this. And it's usually that I will once I do this, that the do is debt. And it's a mental, I think, block that they create for themselves to take this big leap. And my advice is, it could, like what you just said, strategically, it could make a big difference, where you want to be a year after divorce and what you want the books to look like after divorce on before you start paying all this stuff off.
Absolutely. And to your point, that's a mental decision, or that's an emotional decision rather than a mental decision. And you don't want to be making divorce decisions from that emotional state. It doesn't
Exactly.
help you at the end of the day.
One other thing we have to touch is there are a lot of also people that come to us before they get started, and they wonder, what can I cut off before I file for what credit card, payments that I'm making right now can I
Mhm.
start cutting off before I even file for divorce? And this is where it can get tricky and you can look really bad,
Mhm.
you know, before you file if you start doing some things that aren't necessarily status quo of the household. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. I think that it is fair to say that if you have high credit and if you have a lot of credit available to you, you probably do want to limit that person's spending because you don't know what they're going to do when you're approached with a divorce, and you don't want to end up having to fight about in court, should I be paying off this credit card debt? The other thing is that you usually, I've done it before, put somebody as a signator to your
Yeah.
credit card, and you'll want to remove them as the signator to your credit card immediately. However, if you have a spouse who is a stay-at-home spouse or have significantly less income than you, and they use that credit card for family needs on a regular basis, you do not want to be cutting that credit card off. The court is not going to look kindly on you on trying to play that financial game of forcing a settlement in a divorce case through cutting off finances.
And Shawna, credit card statements is almost as personal as going through somebody's underwear drawers.
It most definitely is.
It tells a lot about a person, right?
Yeah.
And it feels a violation of an intimate, like just showing people what you're feeling. How public is the credit card statements? How necessary are the credit card statements throughout the divorce process? And can I get divorced even without anybody looking at them?
Well, the short answer is yes, you can if nobody asks for them.
Yeah.
But if the other side says, I want to see your credit card statements, you are going to be required to show them your credit card statements. And if this ends up in court, those are going to be made an exhibit and presented to the court, and it becomes part of the file. Right. So and we see all kinds of things on credit card. It tells the person's entire life because that's what we do now. How rare is it that we use cash for anything?
Yeah.
And so the entire time, if you're spending $500 at Costco, $300 at Target, that's going to be listed on there. If you're going to specialty stores, those things are going to be listed on there. What airline you took, what bar you visited, how much alcohol you bought that month. And those will be analyzed, especially if it's a contentious divorce.
There's also the important conversation of the cost benefit analysis of how much you want to spend on an attorney to fight some of these credit card liabilities for you. What do you typically advise our clients on that?
The cost benefit analysis is a conversation I have a lot. How much do you want to spend to prove that you are right? And is it going to be worth it for you in the end? If the answer is, we have $10,000 worth of credit card debt and I want him to be responsible for, 5 of it, but we're going to have to go to court to make that happen, it might not be beneficial in the end because you're going to spend $5,000 more, more than $5,000 to get there, and you might not win. Right. The times when it's time to roll the dice is when you do have seriously egregious spending, either pre or post separation, and it's very evident of what we can show. But the truth of the matter is most of those are going to settle because hopefully they have a good attorney on the other side advising that, you don't want to take this to trial, you're going to lose. So hopefully when we do the cost benefit analysis, it's going on both sides. And that's when it's helpful to have someone on the other side who also knows what they're doing.
And before we sign off here, one advice I always give our clients who don't have any credit cards in their own name and they come and see us is to go open up a credit card in your own name because this is not legal advice, it's general life advice. You want to start building up your own credit before you're fully on your own, because a lot of households, one spouse is basically living off the credit score of the other spouse, and nothing's been in their name for them to build up that credit. And I think that's we're making credit cards sound really scary here, and they can be for sure. The debt can be scary, and credit card statements coming up in divorce can be scary. But I think 2 big lessons I'm learning from our conversation is don't use the credit card statements or paying off debt as a mental block to not move forward in something in life, or to not, or use it, or at least go get a strategic consultation of how the debt could actually be a strategy play in negotiations, right? And then the other part is if you're in the dark, if you're completely in the dark on the household debt, it's time to pull a credit report, like Shawna said, and our guest 2 weeks ago, Ted Jenkins, mentioned as well. And make sure you're building up some credit for yourself as well. Shawna, do you have any final tips or thoughts that we didn't touch upon?
I really think it's important for the people to have those financial discussions even before they get married, so that when you're coming into a marriage, you are understanding what are my expectations of my financial responsibilities and your financial responsibilities. I think it actually helps people to stay together and married longer. And if they come to a divorce, it makes the divorce process so much easier.
When we were talking to our financial planner, Ted Jenkin, a couple of weeks ago, Ted mentioned how people have a funny relationship with money, and it goes back to their parents and their parents' relationship with money, and and their spending reflects that. And debt is the same thing. People have their debt story is pretty similar to their money story, and that really comes from their parents and what they saw there. And to Shawna's point, for a key to successful marriage is to be very open with your partner on, hey, here's where I come from. Here's what debt looked like in my family and the story we had about, debt and how it felt. There's households where it's very much the Ramsey method of no debt, no credit card debt, everything needs to be in cash. And then there's households where they're comfortable with a certain level of debt, or they, use debt to build, businesses, and they have a different relationship with debt. I think a couple coming together need to be very, very open about those things, because usually it's not just the debt and it's not usually the money. There's a lot more underlying there, but you don't really get to poke around and discover all those things till you start having these conversations, to Shawna's point. Shawna, thank you so much for doing this with me. If anybody would like to ask more questions or has concerns similar to what Shawna and I have discussed, please reach out to us at atlantadivorcelawgroup.com. Both Shawna and I would love to help out and answer any questions you may have. Thank you, everybody.